All the talk about how to raise taxes and all the discussion about taxes is a perfect segue into my campaign, which is that more freedoms lead to smaller government, which leads to lower taxes. And I want to talk about a couple of different ways we can do that. I first wanted to point out that back in 1790, when the country was still young, our taxes were only 6 to 7%, and that was all state, local, and federal property taxes. And now we're up to 42% of our income goes to state, local, and federal taxes. And that doesn't account for inflation, which most people don't realize is another tax. When they print more money, the common person, the common taxpayer, gets hit with inflation. That's a tax. I also wanted to point out that I like to switch to 2 to 4, especially now that we're on daylight savings time. The farmers market down here, Decatur Organic Farmers Market, they always switch whenever the time switches, because the myth is that farmers were the ones somehow behind the whole time change thing. But actually, they don't like time change at all, because they get up to the sun. It doesn't matter what the clock says. And so that's one of my things that I plan on driving at, is none of this back and forth twice a year. It just ruins my body clock. I don't know about yours. And then another little thing that David Edelman, one of the things that he sponsored was the alcohol sales, allowing alcohol sales on Sunday. And I agree with him that the no alcohol sales on Sunday is just a ridiculous idea, and we need to start allowing that. It's just inconvenient. But getting back to how more freedoms leads to smaller government, which leads to lower taxes. The first thing I want to talk about is it's a life or death issue. We have 110 or so people on death row right now, including Troy Davis, who's been on death row for almost 20 years now. And he's been within hours of execution 3 times. And he was convicted on the testimony of 9 eyewitnesses, and 7 of them have since recanted their testimony. And it's pretty for sure that he's innocent. It's a travesty of justice, and it's the tip of the iceberg that points to our death penalty system being broken. This is an example of how fixing the death penalty system would lead to a smaller government. It actually costs $1.6 million more per death penalty case than it does just to house a prisoner for life. So I would right away put my name to the Senate Bill 175, which is a death penalty moratorium, which would call a timeout on the death penalty. Another example of how more freedoms lead to smaller government, which leads to lower taxes, and this is a big one. This is the one that I really get passionate about, because the war on drugs is a war on our own citizens. The prohibition didn't work back in the 1920s, and that was prohibition against alcohol. Exactly the same things happen with the war on drugs as happened in prohibition. It drives up the cost. It makes the drug, whatever drug it is, alcohol or whatever, it concentrates it. So you have moonshine instead of beer. You have very highly refined cocaine instead of coca leaves. Like Hugo Chavez, well, okay, I won't talk about that, but he eats took leaves all the time, and he says he's healthy, so it's no big deal. And of course that might take a while, so in the meantime we've got to do something to fix this problem, or to start fixing on the problem, and that is medical marijuana is the first issue I would drive at. And I'm running out of time, so I can't get into talking about how I feel like the water conservation issue is something I can bring to the table, my experience to the table as a small business owner in looking at budgets. And I was the president of my homeowners association for 3 years, and that was actually able to help bring my community's water usage, cut it in half. And so I have some other ideas that are going to come up later in my campaign, so I hope you'll be watching for that information. And finally, one last thing, I wanted to give a little plug for the Libertarian Party, because the situation we have right now is that we have this constant back and forth between the Democrats over here on the left, on your left, to my right, and the Republicans over here on the right. And you know, from one term to another in this two-party system, or supposedly two-party system, we just keep going back and forth, and there'll be a Republican for a couple terms and a Democrat for a couple terms. And meanwhile, there's a ratcheting effect, and it just keeps, each one spends more money. The Republicans spend more money on wars. The Democrats do different programs that cost us more money. And the programs keep staying in place, and we just are in this nonstop cycle. We've got to break the cycle by getting the Libertarians here in the middle, because we have issues that we agree with on both sides, with both Republicans and Democrats, and I think we need a Libertarian in office to mix things up a little bit.